For about $5, they say, you can end every pest problem you have ever had in your garden. 2 level spoons of a plain white powder, the kind that has been sitting under your kitchen sink for years. Sprinkle it around your tomatoes and the ants vanish. The beetles vanish. And according to the videos, they vanish forever. Maybe you have seen one of those clips. A weary gardener, a sad-looking plant, and then, like magic, a thriving bed a week later. And somewhere down in the comments, somebody always whispers that this was an old Amish secret, as though the answer had been deliberately kept from the rest of us all along. So before you go reaching under that sink, pull up a chair beside me a minute. Let me give you the honest version, the kind 2 old gardeners would trade over the fence, with nothing in our hands to sell you. Here is the short of it. That powder is real, and a little of what they say about it is even true. But the word forever is doing an enormous amount of lying, and if you follow the viral version of this trick, if you really do tip 2 spoons of it onto the dirt around your plants, there is a fair chance you will spend the next 2 or 3 years wondering why nothing wants to grow in that spot anymore. So today, we're going to do the thing those videos never do. We're going to walk through what 70 years of real science actually says about that little white box, what it genuinely kills, what it cannot touch, no matter how heavy a hand you use, and the single, quiet way it can undo the very soil you have spent a lifetime learning to trust. First, let us be gentle with ourselves. If this trick has ever tempted you, even for a moment, you are in awfully good company. I have felt the pull of it too, because the story is nearly perfect, isn't it? 1 cheap box, 1 simple powder, 1 tidy answer for every bug that ever chewed a hole in your hopes. After a lifetime of carrying home spray after spray that never quite delivered, who among us wouldn't want to believe there was finally one easy thing that worked? And here is the honest reason a story like that travels so far and so fast. A simple, cheap, do-everything fix is a wonderful thing to share, and a terrible thing to sell. Nobody films an advertisement for the slow, careful, hedged-about truth, because the careful truth never made anyone rich. So the exciting version races around the world, and the honest version sits quietly in a university extension office in a plain language fact sheet where hardly anyone ever thinks to go looking. Now, about that Amish secret. I have to set the record straight here because the real story is actually better than the myth. This powder is no forgotten folk mystery. It is borax. The very same 20-mule team borax that has sat on American store shelves since the 1890s. It was hauled out of the dry lake beds of Death Valley by wagon teams, 20 mules at a time, which is exactly where the name on the box comes from. There is nothing secret about it, and nothing Amish about it. It is one of the most ordinary minerals in the whole laundry aisle. And ordinary, as we are about to see, is not at all the same thing as harmless. So what exactly are we holding when we pick up that yellow and green box? Borax is a mineral salt. Its proper name is sodium borate. And at the very heart of it sits a single trace element called boron. I want you to hold on to that one word, boron, because it is the key to this entire story. Everything borax does, every bit of good and every bit of harm, comes down to how much boron is along for the ride. You will also hear people talk about boric acid in the same breath, as if the two were the same thing. They are cousins, not twins. Boric acid is a more concentrated relative, but the scientists at the National Pesticide Information Center, that is, the independent science center run out of Oregon State University, put it about as plainly as anyone can. Borax and boric acid both do their work through the boron they carry. More boron, stronger effect. And that effect, it turns out, cuts in more than one direction. Because here is the part the videos always leave on the cutting room floor. That same center notes that borax and boric acid can certainly kill insects, but they can just as easily kill plants, simply by drawing the moisture right out of them. Read that again, slowly. The very thing you are being told to sprinkle all over your vegetables is, in the wrong amount, a weed killer. Tuck that quietly into the back of your mind. We will come back for it before we are done. Now let us start paying back that word forever, because this is where the grand promise begins to come apart in our hands. The viral claim is that borax kills any pest that crosses its path. The honest truth is that borax is fussy. It is, at heart, a stomach poison. For it to do anything at all, an insect has to actually eat it. No bite, no harm. It really is that simple. So think for a moment about which bugs do the most damage in your garden. The aphids clustered thick on a rosebud. The whiteflies that lift off a tomato leaf like a little snowstorm when you brush past. The spider mites stippling your beans. Every single one of them feeds the same way. They slip a tiny needle into the leaf and drink the plant's juices from the inside out. They never take so much as a nibble of anything sitting on the surface, which means you could dust those leaves with borax until the box is empty, and the aphids would keep right on drinking, perfectly content. You will not have harmed the pest one bit, but you may very well have scorched your plant. Because remember, to a leaf, borax is a drying agent. So, if it is those soft, sap-sucking bugs you are battling, set the borax right back down. The gentler, older remedies still win this fight, and they always have. A weak solution of plain dish soap and water, sprayed in the cool of the early morning, and tested first on just a few leaves to be safe, will smother most of them. So will a light misting of neem oil. These work with the grain of your garden instead of against it, and they leave your soil alone. And there is your first mistake to avoid, and it is the big one. Never reach for borax against a bug that doesn't chew. It is the wrong tool for that job, and reaching for it anyway will cost you leaves and sometimes whole plants that you simply cannot get back. So is borax good for nothing at all in the war on pests? No, not quite. There is one job it does beautifully, and as it happens, it is just about the oldest trick in the whole book. Ants. Here is why borax and ants have been such a reliable old pairing for generations. Spraying an ant trail is a fool's errand, and most of us have learned that the hard way. You kill the 50 ants you can see marching across the patio, and the queen, sitting safe and deep underground, simply lays 50 more by morning. You have accomplished nothing but a moment's satisfaction. But borax is slow. And that slowness, strange as it sounds, is the whole secret. If a worker ant carries a sweet, poisoned crumb back down into the nest before she feels a single thing, she shares that food, mouth to mouth, with the others, even with the queen herself. The scientists have a lovely word for that sharing. They call it trophallaxis. It is how one tiny dose, carried home by one small ant, can quietly reach an entire colony you never even see. So, if it is ants you are truly after, here is the careful way to go about it. You dissolve a small amount of borax, no more than a teaspoon, into a little warm sugar water, stirring until it is completely dissolved so the ants can't simply pick around the grains and steal the sugar. You soak a cotton ball in that sweet liquid, and you tuck it inside a small, closed container with a few holes poked in the lid, set right alongside the trail. That closed container matters a great deal, and I will tell you exactly why in just a moment. Now, the mistakes. And please, listen close here because this is the part I worry about for us. First, keep it weak. Make that mixture too strong, and the worker ant dies on the doorstep before she ever makes it home, and the whole clever plan falls apart. And second, far more important than the first, borax is not something to have lying around loose. The folks at the Poison Center will tell you that small children are especially sensitive to it. So that bait belongs inside a closed container, set up out of reach, well away from any grandchild's curious fingers, well away from the dog's curious nose, and nowhere near a single thing you intend to eat. Never ever scatter the loose powder across an open floor or an open garden bed where little hands and paws roam. And honestly, the simplest safe choice of all is a sealed ant bait station from the hardware store. The very same science, with none of the worry. One real job done with real care. That, my friend, is a very different thing from any pest forever. Before we go any further, and the next part is the one that genuinely protects your soil, I have gathered the useful half of everything we have talked about onto a single page. What borax truly works on and what it never will. The careful, safe way to use it. The one mistake that can cost you years of good ground. And a short, honest little list of what to skip altogether. It is the sort of thing you can tape right inside the shed door and glance at every spring before you start. Just point your phone's camera at the code here on the screen, and the page is yours. No charge, nothing to sign up for. Then settle back in and stay with me, because now we are going to talk about those 2 spoons themselves, and why, of everything in this whole video, that is the part most likely to break a gardener's heart. Here is the twist that makes borax so genuinely confusing. And I will say, it is a fair twist, not some gimmick. That very same boron that poisons a bug is also, in just the right amount, real and honest food for a plant. The soil scientists at the University of Minnesota Extension explain that boron is an essential nutrient. Plants truly do need a little of it for building strong cell walls, for moving sugars around inside themselves, for setting good fruit and filling out good seed. And when boron runs short, you can often see the hunger written right on the plant. A head of cauliflower turns brown and soft in its center. Beets come up corky and hollow-hearted inside. Apples form up small and oddly misshapen. And the natural, loving instinct of any gardener who sees that is to think, well then, let me go give my soil a little boron. But this is exactly where I have to slow the 2 of us right down. Because the gap between not quite enough boron and far too much of it is razor thin. Thinner than for very nearly any other nutrient you will ever handle in your life. A pinch can help a garden. A spoonful can poison it. There is precious little room in between the 2, and there is simply no eyeballing your way safely across that gap. Now, you may have heard a particular figure floating around, that something like 70% of home garden soils are starving for boron. And I want to be straight with you about that, the way I promised. I went looking hard for a real source behind that number, and I could not find one, and the actual science does not support it. A boron shortage is a regional thing. It turns up mostly in sandy soils, low in organic matter, in the rainier parts of the country. And a great deal of ordinary garden soil already holds every bit of the boron it needs. Which leaves us exactly one honest way to ever know for certain. A soil test. For just a few dollars, your county extension office or a soil lab will tell you whether your own ground is truly short on boron. And if it genuinely is, they will tell you the precise, tiny amount to add for your particular soil. You follow that number, and only that number, to the letter. I know that is not the thrilling answer the videos promise, but it is the one that keeps your garden alive to see another spring. And so, at last, we have arrived at the very heart of the matter. The 2 spoons themselves. When a video cheerfully tells you to tip 2 spoonfuls of dry borax straight onto the dirt around your tomatoes, understand clearly what it is actually handing you. It is not handing you a miracle. It is handing you a slow disaster dressed up to look like a gift. Because boron does not simply rinse away with the next good rain and forgive you your mistake. Once you have overloaded a patch of ground with it, that boron can linger in the root zone for years on end. And this is no new or fringe worry either. More than 60 years ago, the United States Department of Agriculture published a bulletin titled, simply and plainly, Boron Injury to Plants. The careful people have known about this danger for a very, very long time. It is only the viral videos that have managed to forget it. The signs of an overdose come on quiet at first, the way the worst troubles often do. The oldest leaves begin to yellow along their very edges. Then they brown and curl and start to die back from the tips inward. And here is the cruelest part. Some of the plants we cherish most are the very ones most easily harmed. Green beans, peas, strawberries. They are tender to boron, every one. A heavy dose down at their feet does not feed those plants at all. It scorches their roots, and they will fail you, and you will not understand why. So that, right there, is the real counter-evidence. The thing the viral version of this trick will simply never tell you. The same 2 spoons that were sold to you as the whole answer are, for a great many gardens, the quiet beginning of a problem that will outlast the season, and the next one, and the one after that. If that little box came with an honest label, it would read, powerful, useful, and terribly easy to get wrong. By now, you might be tempted to think the kindest thing to do with that box is march it straight out to the trash. Not at all. Don't do that. Borax has real, lasting value in a gardener's life. It just isn't out among your vegetables, where the videos keep insisting on putting it. So let me leave you with 2 uses that are genuinely, honestly, worth keeping. The first lives in the wood of the garden itself. The raised beds you built, the fence posts, the old shed. You can dissolve borax in warm water and brush it onto bare, unpainted wood, and as the wood drinks that water in, the borax settles down deep into the grain. Then, when a termite or a carpenter ant comes along and takes a bite of that treated wood, the boron wipes out the particular gut bacteria those insects depend on to digest it, and so they simply cannot feed. The expensive commercial wood treatments use this very same science, and they will charge you dearly for the privilege. Just 2 honest cautions on that one. It washes out in heavy rain, so keep it to wood that lives under a roof, or seal it afterward with a good paint or stain. And, as always now, keep it well away from wherever children and pets play, and well away from anything you mean to grow food in or eat from. The second use is pure, simple joy. When your zinnias or your hydrangeas are at the absolute peak of their summer glory, you can keep that beauty for years. Both Iowa State University Extension and Clemson recommend the same easy recipe. You mix borax together with plain white cornmeal. You lay your fresh-cut blooms gently into it, and you carefully bury the petals. Then you leave that open box in a dry room for a couple of weeks, and the borax slowly draws the moisture out while the color and the shape stay behind, held in place. You dust them off, and there you have it. Summer flowers sitting on your windowsill in the very dead of winter. And I want you to notice what those 2 good uses quietly have in common. Neither one of them ever asks you to gamble your soil. That, in the end, is the whole difference between a gardener using borax wisely and a gardener being used by a viral video. Step back from the box with me for just a moment, because I believe there is a deeper lesson hiding in all of this, one worth more than any pest tip. We were promised a single powder that does absolutely everything. And oh, how badly we want that to be true, because it would be so wonderfully easy, wouldn't it? But the gardeners who fed their families straight through the Depression, the ones who kept the victory gardens going through the war years, who trusted the county extension man and the worn old almanac on the shelf. They never had a miracle in a box. What they had instead was patience and a quiet understanding that the real work of a garden happens down in the dirt, where you cannot see it. They fed the soil. Compost from the kitchen scraps and the autumn leaves, a blanket of mulch over the beds, the slow, season-by-season building of dark, living ground, teeming with more life than any of us will ever lay eyes on. And up out of that healthy soil came strong, sturdy plants. Plants that simply weren't so helpless and so desperate in the face of every passing bug and trouble. And that living soil is the one thing no company on earth can bottle or patent or sell back to you fresh every single spring. It costs almost nothing to build, which, in a world built entirely on selling you the next product, is the one quality it is never quite allowed to be: exciting. Nobody buried this knowledge in a vault to keep it from you. The market simply never had a good reason to keep reminding you it was there. Borax has its small, honest place in the shed, but it was never the secret. The real secret, if we can even call something so plain a secret at all, is the very same one your grandmother knew in her hands without ever needing the words for it. Feed the soil, and then let the soil do the rest. I find myself thinking back to that picture we started with. The garden at sunrise, the dew still on it, and that little box of powder under the kitchen sink, promising in its cheerful way to fix every last thing that ever went wrong out there. And I will be honest with you, the way I'd want a friend to be honest with me. For years, I was the one kneeling down to reach under that sink. I wanted the easy answer every bit as much as anyone ever has. It took me a long, slow time and more than a few scorched and sorry-looking plants to finally understand that I had been trying to win the whole battle up on the surface, when everything that truly mattered was happening quietly underneath, in the dark, in the ground. The day I finally stopped fighting my garden and started simply feeding it was the day it began, little by little, to forgive me. If that is the kind of gardening you come from, the patient kind, the honest kind, the kind that has learned to trust the ground beneath far more than the label on the box, then you already belong here, at this fence, with the rest of us. Subscribe, and let us keep on tending the old, honest way, together. Pull up a chair anytime you like. The coffee is always on.